Good afternoon and welcome to today's town hall on generative AI. My name is Tiffany Crosby, Chief Learning Officer here at the Ohio Society. Before I turn things over to our President and CEO, Scott Wiley, I'd like to share a few housekeeping items. Please watch for quick polls that will pop up throughout today's presentation. These polls are a way to engage in the content, but also serve as attendance checks for the program. We have disabled the chat because we want the focus to be on the presenters and the important content they're sharing with us. We encourage you to ask questions of our presenters by using the Q&A function. For those of you who need it, CPE for this town hall will be awarded within 48 hours. Please check your Learning Center at that time. And with that, I will now turn over to Scott to start the program.
Thanks, Tiffany, and good afternoon, everyone. It is great to be with you on this Thursday, February the 15th, 2024. And I want to welcome you to today's Ohio Society of CPAs Town Hall. I'm Scott Wiley, President and CEO of your Ohio Society of CPAs. And today we have an incredible topic. We're going to talk about artificial intelligence. We're going to talk about generative AI, and we have some amazing thought leaders on hand who are going to help us unpack how this transformative technology can help us work faster, better, and smarter. So we've got an action-packed agenda. We're going to start off with a discussion of generative AI, its uses, and how to get started. Finally, we will wrap up with a roundup of legislative and regulatory issues that we're monitoring. As always, there's a lot to cover, so let's get started. Generative AI has the power to completely transform the way we do business, the way we learn, how we spend our time, and so much more. I'm excited to have two leading experts in this field join us today. Joining me to kick off our discussion of generative AI is Jim Blackwell, who is the Managing Director of BDO Digital USA. In a moment, I will stop sharing my screen so you can see Jim and I in a larger setting. But Jim is a technology evangelist with over a quarter century of IT solutions design and delivery to enterprise and mid-market businesses. He earned his master's in business administration and data analytics at the University of Southern Indiana. He is going to help us demystify generative AI and share how this evolving technology is transforming how we work. Jim, welcome to the program. It is great to have you with me today.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation.
Well, certainly it is an interesting time in this space. And Jim, as we dive in, I want to start just at a high level. When we say the term generative AI, can you just kind of frame up for our participants what we mean by that?
Yeah, so the whole concept of AI has gotten pretty big, right? And people are asking, what does this mean exactly, and how is this different from a lot of the technologies we've been using for a while? For example, RPA, robotic process automation, or even the voice to text and some of these things that really they do take on somewhat of an AI capabilities, right? When you think of a very narrow use case AI, we're talking about things like Alexa, right? So I get up every morning and I say, "Okay, Google," and it turn on my lights on my island. It's the technologies, it's a suite of technologies. AI ultimately is a suite of technologies that mimic human intelligence, and that can be fairly broad in definition. When we talk about generative AI, this is where things have really changed rapidly. And this is where AI is to the point where it's able to learn and then generate something new. I actually did this just the other day. I was sitting in a board meeting and they were like, "What do you mean it generates something new? Is this, what are you talking about?" Well, it's something entirely new. And now it's still an amalgamation of data scrapes and images and everything out there. So there's some of that, people are concerned about, copyright content and that sort of thing. But ultimately, it's the same thing that our minds do. When I think of an image in my mind, a lot of times I'm scraping from things I've seen and things I've read, and it's the same process. My mind works that same way. It's not necessarily that I'm coming up with something totally new. It's an amalgamation of things that I've seen and experienced. Generative AI is AI that can actually generate something new. It's taking this into consideration and creating something brand new. I did this with an image. I'm sitting in a conference room and they asked me about it. And I said, hey, I went to GPT-4, right, which has the capabilities of generating images as well, Dolly. And I said, create for me an image of a bunch of dolphins sitting in a conference at a conference table. And it generated an image of dolphins sitting at a conference table. Bizarre, but real. And that image had never been created before. Hopefully no one's ever really even thought of that. It was so bizarre.
Well, and Jim, as we think about this in the context of how CPAs are working with their clients, can you give a sense of how far along are organizations today in using AI? And I know obviously that's a broad question because they're at all varying levels, but as we think about this in the ecosystem, how far along are organizations today?
I'm actually surprised at a lot of organizations that are not yet embracing this, right? There's a lot of hesitancy. There's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt out there that organizations say, well, I'm not real sure what's happening with this. I have concerns. And, is this really real? Is it accurate? Is it AI hallucinations, which is a thing, right? Where AI is filling in the gaps. And I think that as I have conversations over and over, first, I notice a couple things, right? That individuals aren't necessarily embracing this and using it themselves in everyday life. And I think until we start doing that on a regular basis, in a broader sense, it's going to be a fairly slow uptake. Every time I go into a presentation, one of the first things I encourage people to do is, hey, have you installed ChatGPT, the free version, on your phone, and just start using it for your personal life, right? Start date night, make plans, right? We just finished, Valentine's Day. You could have used ChatGPT to really give you some great ideas on how to make an amazing Valentine's Day, right? But start using it in your daily life. But I find when I ask around the room, how many of you are actually using it in your everyday life? Very few. I'll get maybe 20%. When we go into organizations, I think a lot of pushes have been made to use robotic process automation, RPA, which makes a lot of sense, especially in the finance side, right? All of the accounts receivable, accounts payable, that whole process of invoices coming in and processing those through and actually posting them into your ERP. Organizations have made a lot of progress with that, but they're just not sure where to go with this and how to actually use it in their daily life. And I think a great deal of that is just because unfamiliarity, right? They're just not familiar yet enough with how this might help and what it can do for me.
Well, and that unfamiliarity, but also that fear, that risk that some feel.
Yeah.
So, how do you observe, given the lens you have from BDO Digital, that how do you observe organizations are dealing with the risk of their data being leaked when using a large language model? How are they working through that?
Yeah, well, this is where we're advising organizations to think very carefully about two things. First off, what data do I want to even put into my models, right? And most organizations, if they're being realistic and they think about, okay, I would like to have AI look at everything that I do. I mean, it's helpful, right? When you think about consolidating documents or reviewing maybe, contracts between what is your standard and what somebody sends you to sign and being able to review those and compare those and highlight the biggest differences and the biggest concerns, being able to just use AI every day. I think I want it to have access to a lot of my stuff so it can give me great insights. But if you're going to do that, then you need to think about, how do I make sure that this AI is in my own secure walls, right? It's in my world. So, we're pointing them toward a couple of different things, right? You can use, an enterprise level version of, let's say, a ChatGPT, right? Or even the Google side. You can start licensing those. What we're suggesting, what we do, we're a Microsoft Gold partner. So we're telling them, hey, set it up inside your own Microsoft environment, your own world, right? That might be a Microsoft Copilot, or it might be Azure OpenAI instance, but it's basically a GPT solution, a large language model, in your own secure castle, right? The walls of your environment. That's what an Azure tenant is. So a lot of people here might be using the Microsoft Office 365, suite. You can actually set up AI GPT, a copy of the Chat GPT model, right? The model that Microsoft funded with $10 billion. That comes over on a regular basis into the Microsoft world. And you can actually license that and use it in your own secure world where all of your prompts, all of your engagement with that, all of the responses it gives you stays in your world. The key isn't the platform. The key is the security boundaries. You want whatever you put into it, whatever comes out of it, to stay in your world, because that's your IP. That's your, you're thinking about your documents and your information. If I'm gonna train, an AI model with my financial statements, I want those secure. I want those in my environment. I don't want that going anywhere else. And so you have to think very carefully about what you're going to implement, what you're going to use.
Well, and along those lines, you identify some of those risks that companies are thinking about.
Yep.
Are there other risks that we may not be thinking about that companies are as they explore or consider AI use within their organizations?
Yeah, I think I think there are two primary risks that organizations need to think about. The first is making bad decisions based upon a bad response, right? So it's incumbent upon us to trust and verify. So anytime you're putting information into a large language model and you're asking it to give you feedback and insights, as I would do with anyone that gives me a report or gives me feedback, I would analyze it. I would look at it and review it and make sure that it's accurate according to my understanding as best as I can tell, and make sure that what I'm going to do with that is appropriate, right? So review, analyze, check it, double check it. It's fine. You should not ever use an AI model just copy and paste. I've seen that done. I see it done sometimes on posts and blogs, and it's just a bad idea. Right? Make it your own, review it, and make sure that you're putting yourself into it. The other thing to consider is this: as we start to train AI models with our data, we have to ask ourselves, is our data, is it unbiased? Is it complete? Is it holistic? And does it give us a real picture of what we should do? If I take my data, let's say my HR data, and I ask AI, I want you to give me the perfect candidate to hire for our organization, right? But my data that I train it with is everybody I've hired in the past who happens to be from a certain region, or maybe with a certain educational background, or certain, Ivy League schools, or whatever it might be, even race or gender. If my data is biased, my results is going to be bad. My answers are going to miss, right? So you need to make sure you look at your data and ask the hard questions. Is our data already biased, and is it going to give an obvious result because that's the direction our data is telling it to go? An AI model can only do what it can do with the type of data that it's given, and that's something that organizations, large organizations, you think about financial organizations, you think about the decisions they're making on loans and that sort of thing. You have to address your data and make sure that you've gone through some sort of an AI bias detection process.
So, Jim, we've got a couple of questions that have come in from audience members, and I want to take a look at them and ask. So, realizing you're hearing these for the first time as well, do you believe it's okay to share client details in ChatGPT? Does GPT store these inquiries anywhere on the backside that we should be afraid of? So
if you go to OpenAI and you ask, and you look through their documents, you can even select keep my data private. You can select some of those options. Here's the deal: I don't know what they do with that data. I don't know. The reason that we lean toward, standing up a GPT instance in your own, let's say your own Microsoft world, is I've already decided to trust Microsoft with all my stuff. They've got my email, they got my databases, they've already got all my stuff, right? Microsoft has it. So I've decided to let those be the boundaries of protection because I already trust them. If you're in the Google world and that's where you live, you already trust Google with that data. You've already leaned into them. That is your, that's your boundaries of security. So I don't know what happens on the enterprise level of OpenAI. That's where you're looking at their MSAs. You're looking at all the legal agreements and seeing what they do with that data. My concern is I just don't know. And since I've already chosen a platform to trust, I lean that direction.
One of the things you mentioned at the beginning was kind of the surprise, I'll use that word, with just how far along organizations aren't.
Yeah.
So for those who are prepared to, crawl out a little bit further on the edge, if you will, any thoughts or perspective you might share on how can a company get started sooner rather than later?
Yeah. So I think one of the first barriers to entry in this is ignorance. And I don't say that in a bad way. I'm just saying it's just a lack of understanding of what it is, what it can do, and how I might use it. And I think that knowledge education side of it needs to start with leadership in the organization. So as leaders, we need to take a look at it and say, okay, maybe this isn't my thing. Maybe I'm not a technologist. I'm going to just start using this in my daily life and see what it can do and see the art of the possible. I sat, when this first came out a little over a year ago, I sat down and I was blown away. I mean, I went through and spent, a lot of time researching what it could do, the possibilities. I think that's what people need to do. If you've never used it, go spend 30 minutes, go do a search on Google and just type in, become a ChatGPT expert in 30 minutes. I don't care what video comes up. It's probably going to benefit you and educate you. Out of that, you start to get together those people in your organization that are progressively minded when it comes to technology and brainstorm with them. And by the way, use GPT to help you brainstorm because it's really good at that. That's one of the things it's great at is ideation. So you educate, you brainstorm for possible use cases or scenarios where we might use it. And then you got to start building. And that's the security, that's the platform, let's land on something. And let's decide where we're going to go, because you come up with that good use case that is, it's high ROI, right? It's good ROI, and it's also the ability to do that, right? That normal management consulting graph that we put things in. You find that stuff that's in the upper right quadrant, and you get after it, and you go do something. Don't try to boil the ocean. Get started, and implement it, and then you train and make sure your people are ready for it. And I think getting going, just start small. Don't boil the ocean. Find a single use case. Figure out what's the best platform for us and get moving on it is going to have a big impact.
And as participants in today's session consider this and think about, okay, I am ready to get started, and they want to begin to source some of these things. Is there any advice you'd have as you would encourage them to go out and do that? Hey, I want to find something that can help me gather knowledge or gather information, or look at how I might use leverages for me. Is there a good place to go and source that data that you might recommend they consider looking?
So a couple of things that I've done is I'm following a few there's some really good influences out there on the I can tell you one right now is Nicholas Boucher does one for finance and accounting, and Nicholas has some great content. He's on LinkedIn. You can go find him. I'm only connected with him. I've never talked to him, but I watch his content because he's smart with how he's approaching this from a CPA and finance perspective. He actually has a spreadsheet of 400 prompts that a finance expert can use. To me, that's a great starting point. For you to take a look at, right? I think when you create a ChatGPT account, ask it where you should start looking. And go ahead and ask the AI model, hey, give me some ideas on where I might go and learn some more about this, and let it kind of go through and educate you some. I really believe, and I say this wholeheartedly, I've loved technology my entire life. And I was around before the personal computers were around. So I remember my first personal computer had people saying, this is probably going to be good for games and maybe inventory control and maybe some math, but I'm not sure what else it'll be used for. There's nothing we do today that doesn't involve the computer. Nothing. I think GPT is that big. I think going forward, we will be using this every day in all that we do. Nicholas Boucher, Boucher is the name. There's also somebody else on YouTube called Jason CPA. He's He's pretty fired up, but pretty fun to watch. But again, gives you some great information, gives you some great starting places. Go train yourself, educate yourself, start using it. And then you can have a really powerful conversation with some of your best leadership, your most open-minded leadership at your organization, and say, all right, team, what do we think we might use this for? And let's take a step in that direction.
You know,
So Nicholas Boucher is, real quick, Nicholas Boucher is on LinkedIn, and Jason CPA is on YouTube. And if you want, you know, and what I would do on YouTube is just do a search for Become a GPT Expert in 30 minutes. There are lots of videos out there. Just watch it and become educated and start using it a little bit.
well, Jim, I appreciate you making time for us today and sharing. Certainly a lot of exciting opportunities I see out there for the profession, certainly for accounting and finance. And I really appreciate you spending some time with us. And I'm going to keep our program moving. We've got another guest, so you're welcome to mute and hide screen. But thank you so much. I'm going to pull my slides back up here so folks would bear with me. All right. So I do want to throw up a poll question for our participants. Where do you feel AI could benefit your operation the most? We'll leave that open for a few seconds. I'm going to do my best to answer some of the questions I see while you're answering those. You know, Karina, I'm going to give you my stock answer. Is AI the answer to our CPA shortage, she asks. And my stock answer is yes and no. Yes, in the sense of, for those two CPAs that evaluate and have an awareness of how artificial intelligence and other technologies can inform, strengthen, enhance their practice, their service of clients, their positioning, it's absolutely going to be an answer to some of the solutions they create. Is AI going to replace CPAs? No, but I would say for those who say, good, because I plan to ignore it, that's a choice you make at your own peril. So I don't believe that's a choice you should make, but that is a choice you get to make. So I don't think it's the answer in and of itself, but it can certainly be a part of the solution you create. And I saw that there's a number of questions. We got those answered, so I'm going to keep us moving. Okay, that first poll question has come to a close, and we will get those results shared. And it looks like 41% are saying automating routine tasks. So again, some of that comfort level moving out on the limb slowly in the CPA space. 20% say drafting client communications. 16% say analyzing financial data. So that's a good jumping off point as we continue moving forward. And it's with that that I'm excited to introduce my next guest. I'm pleased to welcome Jeff Loucks, who leads Deloitte's Center for Technology, Media, and Telecommunications through Deloitte Services. In his role, he conducts research and writes on topics that help companies capitalize on technological change. An award-winning thought leader in digital business model transformation, Jeff is especially interested in the strategies that organizations use to adapt to accelerating change. Jeff has a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from The Ohio State University, go Bucks, and a Master of Arts and PhD in Political Science from the University of Toronto. Jeff, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you for joining me.
Scott, thanks a lot for the invitation. I really appreciate it. With your permission, I'm going to share some slides from a study that we've done recently that I hope will shed light on some of the questions we've been discussing with Jim around, you know, what Gen AI is for and how to get started.
Absolutely. The floor is yours.
All right. Okay, let me know when you can see it.
I can see your screen now.
Perfect. Thanks very much. So, you know, thanks everyone for joining me today, and thanks again for the invitation. I'm going to share some insights from a global survey that Deloitte is doing right now, and we're calling the study Now Decides Next, because we really believe that what companies do now to familiarize themselves with generative AI, figure out how to use it, and prepare themselves is really going to determine what they can do next and how quickly they can move with the technology. Just really briefly, we discussed some of this with Jim, but why is Gen AI so important and why are people talking about it now? Well, it has the power to really scale human creativity in ways that we perhaps haven't seen before. And it also has the potential to really advance artificial intelligence technology. Most current artificial intelligence, with machine learning and deep learning neural networks, they use pattern detection to analyze data and to really make predictions. Generative AI uses a lot of those same foundational technologies, but with a few different twists that allow it to mimic and amplify human creativity by developing new content like the kind it was trained on. And that content can be anything from, text, a poem, it can be video, it can even be software code. And so the ways that generative AI can be used either personally or in the enterprise are really, they're multiple, right? And what it allows AI to do is to move from something that can make predictions to something that can be your co-author, your co-creator, or your coach. A few notes on the study that I'm going to share insights from. So what we're doing at Deloitte is we're taking a look at companies that are using generative AI today. So the executives that we're talking to are from 18 different countries across 6 different industries. And every single one of those executives and companies is using Gen AI today, either in full-scale implementations or through pilots. And so many of the companies have got a long experience with Gen AI and artificial intelligence in general. And what I like to say is that it's like a postcard from the near future. So if you're figuring out, how to understand generative AI and how to use it today, you can get some good lessons from these companies that are already experienced in it. We're also doing a quarterly survey so that we can track what those leaders are doing in real time. So we're asking questions like, what is the current baseline of adoption? How are people using it? What are their benefits and challenges? And how is that going to change as people get more experience? What are they doing to build a foundation for their transformation? And how are they going about that? And then, what do leaders think are the broader implications of generative AI? Are there some societal implications for a broader economy that we need to consider?
Hey, Jeff, just so you know, your slides are not advancing.
Oh, they're not advancing?
No, I think you need to put them, you might want to put it in slideshow format and then advance. You're still on the main slide. There you go.
Okay. I'm going to just do this. I've had a little bit of trouble. Thank you very much.
You bet.
So we'll just do it in normal mode. Sorry for that. Oops. Hopefully, generative AI can help us solve technical difficulties on Zoom as well. That would be really good. So we're going to start with our first insight. And that's that, for companies that have got a lot of experience, they're very excited about the technology and its prospects. Nearly a third of them believe that it can drive significant transformation in their company within the next year. And around 79% expect it to drive transformation within 3 years. And I've been looking at technology and technology adoption for about 25 years. And I'll have to say, I haven't seen anything like this where people expect the pace of change and meaningful change to be so fast. And that's part of the reason that I think it's getting so much attention. People can understand intuitively, let's say, what a chat GPT can do when they're using it in their personal lives, as Jim was saying. Then they can start applying that to the ways that they can use it in their business, and they're very excited about it. And their knowledge of what it can do technically is also driving a lot of that excitement. Another thing, and this kind of surprised us, given how new generative AI technology is in some ways, a lot of leaders are very confident about their expertise. We think maybe there's too much confidence out there. About 44% said that their organization's Gen AI expertise is high or very high. And again, I think some of that is because their experience with other kinds of artificial intelligence, but the use cases, the applications, everything's moving so quickly that we expect this, as we track this, for people to reassess maybe their level of expertise. We might even see this go down in our quarterly surveys. When we take a look at those who are confident about their Gen AI expertise, we find something very interesting. First of all, they have a lot of trust in the technology. So we asked them a few questions about their emotions around Gen AI. Do you trust it? Are you uncertain? Are you excited? And those with very high expertise are very trusting of the technology. They believe in it and what it can do. Whereas those who have less experience are definitely more uncertain about it and its capabilities. Those that have a lot of expertise have a lot of interest in the technology among their employees. And so there's a push coming from their employees as well as their executives to experiment. And then finally, we find that those with high expertise feel that Gen AI is potentially a threat to them. They feel greater pressure to adopt it quickly. So those who are experienced, they trust it, there's a lot of interest, and they feel pressure to move quickly. And that combination of high trust and the feeling of pressure can actually be a negative one, right? Because the technology is so potent, and there are a lot of potential challenges with it. And so moving too quickly can end up being a problem. So one of the things that we're trying to do at Deloitte when we talk with our clients is to understand that we can help them to move quickly, but put some guardrails in place so that they're doing so in a safe manner. Interestingly, when it comes to the transformational potential, usually we think about, are you innovating? Are you increasing your speed to innovate? Are you creating new products and services? Most of what's happening right now, and you saw this in your polling question, is automation of routine tasks, improving efficiency and reducing costs. And most technologies do start off that way, where most of the applications are, how can we end up getting ROI quickly? How can we show some cost savings? And that's great, but we think that the real winners with generative AI are going to be the ones who are harnessing that creativity at scale, who are using it to make money in new ways, increase revenue, uncover new insights. Those are things that aren't happening quite as much right now, but we expect to continue. And that we're encouraging companies to, think not just in terms of cost reduction, but also accelerating innovation. There was a question earlier about what's the path to adoption for generative AI? And we've been studying artificial intelligence for several years now in this study. And what we find is that most companies adopt it first through off-the-shelf technologies, meaning generative AI or AI that's already integrated in the software that you use. So we're seeing this right now with ERP systems, with office software and so forth. And in fact, just about every company in technology that we talk to is integrating generative AI into at least some of their products and services. And that's going to be the way that most companies use it first. Maybe it's part of your office technology, your email. Maybe it's something that's part of your ERP, helping you to analyze your data. But as we move on, we expect this technology to be used more often on private data sets, using private language models, and customized applications. Because what ends up happening is if everyone's using off-the-shelf technology, you're going to get a benefit, but you're not going to get a differentiation over your competitors. That is going to require more. In terms of how companies are using it right now, using it to generate and analyze text, creating software code, speech and audio and images. These are all some of the ways that we're seeing it used right now. And we are taking a real look at use cases. How are companies specifically using it? So, content generation, whether that's text, video, audio, is one of those. It's got excellent capabilities for search, knowledge management, and really encapsulating text and data. Virtual assistants and chatbots is a great way that it's being used to facilitate client conversations, and as I mentioned, coding and language translation. So there's a lot that it can do right now. Another insight, when we ask companies, again, these are the leaders, where they're confident and where they're less confident, we found this interesting. They tend to be more confident in their technology infrastructure and their strategy for Gen AI. And so this is interesting because Gen AI does require a fair amount of, if you're doing it on your own, computing power, including some very hard to get chips. So the technology infrastructure, if you're building your own, can be quite complicated. Now, if you're using it, as I was discussing before, with cloud services, with your current software, it's definitely much easier. But we are encouraging our clients to think through what their technology strategy is and their infrastructure, especially when they start moving things in-house. But risk and governance is an area, along with talent, that companies are feeling less confident. Certainly, people are just starting to understand some of the risks that are associated with this. And the governance structures are still evolving. And then what do you do with your talent? Do you need to get more expertise? How are you retraining your people? This is something that's evolving. And in the next wave of our study, which is going to come out in April, we're taking a closer look at talent in particular. Now, when it comes to the societal impacts, most leaders expect that generative AI is going to, centralize power and increase inequality in terms of economic power and inequality. And we released this study at the World Economic Forum in Davos. And this was a topic of conversation between Deloitte's CEO and many of the leaders that we discussed. And so, making sure that this is a technology that provides opportunity for all rather than something that concentrates power will likely require, leadership, much beyond the individual company to, governments, regulatory bodies, and so forth. And in fact, leaders are looking for more regulation and collaboration globally in order to make it easier for them to follow the rules and for Gen AI to be something that is, beneficial to many. And so when we think about what we're advising clients to do based on wave one, there are 6 real areas to focus on. And the first one is experimenting. Make sure that you keep a beginner mindset, no matter how experienced you are, to experiment and adapt, because new language models and capabilities and use cases are emerging all the time right now. So, try it out and experiment. And certainly a lot of those experiments are going to start with off-the-shelf software. But then, try to do some things that are going to be focused specifically on the data that you need to analyze and your own industry. Secondly, make sure we're asking clients to make sure that if they're experimenting, that's something that they can scale. So sometimes we see with a new technology that a pilot will be something like a proof of concept, but you can't make it bigger. You can't end up rolling it out broader. And we are encouraging people to think about how they can scale those experiments in order to increase their learning and to bring more people into it. Now, certainly Gen AI can be used for efficiency gains, but again, we think that the real benefit is going to be how companies can end up scaling that human creativity and that generation of content and the kind of next level of analysis that Gen AI can provide. So don't stop at those efficiency gains. Look for ways to differentiate yourself. When it comes to buying and building, There's no reason to recreate the wheel when it comes to generative AI. There are probably lots of off-the-shelf things that companies can use, and you need to think about building where it's really required, or analyzing the data sets that are internal to you. And the last two I think are really important. We don't believe that generative AI is something that should replace a lot of people. Instead, it should enable people to do their jobs better. And a lot of risk mitigation, in fact, which is the last one, is going to involve keeping people in the loop and keeping people engaged with the technology. But risk mitigation, especially something like accounting, is incredibly important. You need to make sure that you're using generative AI safely, carefully, and doing so in a trustworthy way. Finally, what are some of the questions that people are asking? Are we focused enough on building a foundation for longer term value, or are we too focused on the here and now? As generative AI becomes more commonplace and it's used by more people, how are we going to create competitive advantage for our organization? How are we going to coordinate and integrate an approach to manage risk? Because risk management and mitigation, it requires lots of different parts of the company and lots of different executive groups to collaborate. And then, on a societal level, how can we make sure that disparities and risks don't end up magnifying? So with that, I want to thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to take a few questions if we've got time.
Excellent. Well, Jeff, thank you. Let me pull up some here. As you think about some of these issues that we're seeing, and knowing that kind of the lane you're working in, how are you seeing legislative and regulatory come into play as it relates to AI usage, AI implications? Any thoughts as you do your exploration and your work with your team about how the legislative and regulatory environment should engage, should not engage?
Well, I don't know about kind of should, but I can talk about how it is evolving. I think in the United States, we are not moving as quickly, let's say, as the European Union when it comes to, a set of rules of the road for this. And so, when we're thinking about this with clients, we talk to them about making sure that you are looking at what's happening across geographies, because sometimes what happens in Europe will end up being something that happens here later on. But we also think that if they're being very careful about the way they use data, the kinds of data that they're using it for, and using trustworthy frameworks, that's going to help them no matter what regulation comes down the path.
And you referenced some of the generative AI uses. Excuse me. Any that you can expound on that you might be aware of as relates to law enforcement? We've got a participant who works in forensic accounting and wondering if there's anything there to learn about that. Are you aware?
Unfortunately, I don't have the expertise to comment on that, but I can reach out to others in my organization and maybe answer that question later on. But one of the things that's really interesting about it is that there are so many specific use cases that are emerging right now in terms of how it's being used. So we're seeing a real blossoming of those, industry use cases right now.
Well, Jeff, I just got back a couple of weeks ago from DU, from Deloitte University.
Oh, cool.
And we had some of the team specifically in the tax and assurances areas talking about AI use. And I know Financial Times has reported about the firm's internal AI usages and how there are now more than 7,500 associates using the internal AI tools. Can you expound a little bit on, there's a question from Jared that asks, what are Deloitte's hard no's when it comes to generative AI? What do you want employees to never do within the ChatGPT or another platform? Can you expound on that a little bit without giving away too much, so to speak?
Sure. Well, I think the best way is to talk about how we are using it right now, because the firm has taken a lot of care to ensure that we're using it in ways that have already been tested. So, we're using it as part of our a series of pilots. One of them is called Sidekick, and it allows us to do some text analysis and text generation and other kinds of data analysis within a protected environment. So we're encouraged to experiment with that, see how we can use it. And I'm part, because I'm in the research organization, of a couple of sandboxes, if you will, where we're piloting different ways of analyzing data. And some of that's statistical data, some of that's business data. And then we're also part of a group that's using it in, for emails and Office and some of those automation tasks you were talking about. So what we've done, in addition to individual do's and don'ts, is to set up through our risk group and our technology group ways that we can bring this in-house where we're not exposing any data that would be dangerous.
And I am going to bring back our screen. For purposes of reporting, we do need to allow participants to be able to do the poll. Jeff, one more question I'll ask now that I've got that screen back up, and I'll let the team pull the poll up. Someone did ask, how are you, Jeff, using this in your daily use? So I guess thinking beyond your role and how you're working with clients, I think the nature of it as a professional, how are you personally using AI to help you in the day? Is there anything you can maybe share through that lens?
Well, in my research role, we're using it in a couple different ways. We're using it to understand, what is being discussed in the market in, technology, media, and telecommunications, so that we can stay ahead of some of those trends. So we're using it as a sensing function. And then we're also using it to analyze our own research. What have we done? What are some areas that we need to focus? Like, where have we been focusing? And then what do we need to focus on in the future in order to stay fresh? So, sensing what's coming, analyzing what we've already done, and then we're also using it for some pretty novel data analysis. Our group does a lot of surveys and analyzing financial data for insights, and so we're experimenting with ways of doing that as well.
Great. Well, Jeff, I greatly appreciate you spending time with us today. This was highly informative. I know there's been a lot of interest, and so appreciative for you spending time and certainly for the conversation. And I'm going to keep us moving, so you're welcome to hang on and just mute your audio and unshare your screen. For our audience participants, the second poll question was launched, and it looks like we had over 97% reporting, with 52% saying knowledge of available AI tools and 41% saying guidance on AI implementation. So I am going to keep us moving here as we are in the backstretch of our program, and I've got a couple other key things I did want to share. We do offer several programs coming up on the topic of ChatGPT and the responsible adoption of AI. We start off our series with our ChatGPT Bootcamp for CPAs. There are 2 dates you can select. Both will be held here at our headquarters. We'll also follow up with a bootcamp virtually on responsible AI adoption for CPAs and a strategic guide. For more information on these offerings, you can visit our website at ohiocpa.com/AI. Now, for another quick poll, we'd like to know what types of additional technology education and training would be of value to you, and you can select all that apply. And we'll leave this one up for about 30 seconds so we can keep moving. Okay, we're going to close that poll question, and I will share the results once we do. About 63% said Excel, Power BI, Tableau, data analytic tools, with about 35% saying process automation as well as communication tools, and 32% at time, task, and project management. So a variety of answers there, and we will make sure we're trying to get those product offerings available for you and your peers. Whoops, apologize for that. Here we go. Now, I do want to take a moment to talk about some of the key developments we're watching at the State House and in Washington, D.C. First up, we've covered this topic in our January town hall, but we're still receiving a number of calls. So the new federal BOI reporting requirement bears some repeating. Beneficial ownership information, or BOI reporting, is a new, as of January the 1st, requirement of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which is a bureau of the U.S. Treasury Department. Businesses existing prior to December 31st of 2023 have until the end of this calendar year to make their first filing. New businesses have a shorter deadline of 90 days to file, but that deadline shrinks to 30 days starting in 2025. Companies making ownership changes or need to correct information from a prior filing will have just 30 days to file, even in 2024. Now, our outside legislative counsel has shared that upon his review, he thinks it would be the practice of law for a third party to complete these forms. There's lots of legal analysis to be required. In fact, a law firm that creates a business should automatically add this to their list of documents that need to be filed for new companies created after 2023. So, for example, a CPA should not be forming a legal entity, and once a legal entity is formed, it triggers a reporting requirement to the FinCEN. His advice is to stay away from them. That's advice, that's counsel. For those who decide they do want to do this, it would be important to make sure clients or employers are aware of the requirement to file the report. Most will be able to handle that on their own or can work with their attorney on questions. There is a $500 a day fine for not complying after the law is up and running. This should definitely be on every CPA's checklist to remind those they work with. In fact, it is probably best for CPAs to put this in writing to avoid any blame later if the client fails to file. We have sought guidance from the Supreme Court as they have a final say in what is or is not the authorized practice of law. Related, State Senator George Lang from Westchester has introduced SCR 10 condemning the Federal Corporate Transparency Act that created the BOI and urging Congress to repeal the act on the grounds that it places burdensome and unreasonable requirements on small businesses. While legislative efforts to either delay or suspend BOI reporting requirements remain ongoing, please proceed with caution as this develops. We will continue to provide updates to members whenever there are new developments on this issue, but for now, see our recent article linked in the slide for several resources currently available. Yesterday morning, the Ohio Supreme Court issued a 5-2 decision in the Shad versus Alder case. Justice Pat DeWine, joined by Justices Donnelly, Stewart, Brunner, and Dieters, wrote the majority opinion. Chief Justice Kennedy and Justice Fisher wrote separate dissenting opinions. Regrettably, Shad's attorneys only argued the entire statute was unconstitutional, even the withholding provision itself, and never even raised the refund issue. Therefore, the majority opinion leads to an unfortunate result. Because the temporary law was found to be constitutional, the decision ultimately denies taxpayers the ability to claim 2020 municipal income tax refunds. The Ohio Society did file an amicus brief in the case on August the 10th, 2022, not questioning the constitutionality of the temporary law, but supporting the individual taxpayers who were denied refunds by the cities and required to pay income tax to municipalities where they neither lived nor physically performed services. You will recall in 2021, we did secure a law change, House Bill 110, ensuring qualified remote workers would be able to receive municipal tax refunds for the 2021 tax year. In House Bill 110, the legislature left it up to the Ohio Supreme Court to address refunds for 2020. Unfortunately, the court yesterday did not clearly recognize the distinction between employers' withholding and employees' tax liability. A reminder that in July, the Ohio legislature enacted the first major changes to the commercial activity tax exemption amount since its inception in 2005. The annual minimum tax, or AMT, and annual filing requirement were also eliminated. After the 2-year phase-in, by 2025, nearly 90% of all Ohio-based businesses, will no longer pay the CAT. Since a large majority of taxpayers will not owe any CAT, the Ohio Department of Taxation is recommending that most taxpayers take action to cancel their accounts. Otherwise, those having more than current exemption amount of $150,000 of gross receipts will need to file quarterly $0 tax returns. For a taxpayer that will not be subject to the CAT in 2024, its CAT account may be canceled now or with a return in 2024. Since the 2023 fourth quarter return was already due this week on Monday, February the 12th, the only annual filers will still have the option between now and May the 10th to utilize a checkbox on the annual return to allow a taxpayer to easily cancel the account back to 12/31 of 2023. Pleased to announce this was a major legislative effort that the Ohio Society helped lead a broad coalition to achieve. It's an election year. Shocking. Here we go again. So we have proposals to eliminate taxes. Seems like they always pop up. Ohio would phase out its income tax on non-business income entirely by 2030 and eliminate the commercial activity tax as well under 2 different variation of bills introduced in late January. The Senate plan recently was introduced as Senate Bill 216. That was from Senator Lang and Senator Steve Huffman. And the House plan was introduced as House Bill 386, the Matthews-Lampton bill. Now, the 2 plans would both phase down the rates for Ohio's current 2-bracket income tax structure at differing places. And it's really important to talk about that. The 2-bracket income tax structure at differing paces. Just 10 years ago, we had 9 brackets. Thanks in large part to your work and the Ohio Society's leading advocacy voice, we have lowered those brackets from 9 to 2. The House plan, option 2 in this slide, collapses the tax into a single bracket of 1.17% in 2028 with a full phase out by 2030. The Senate plan, option 1, consolidates the brackets more quickly, bringing them together at 2.7% in 2026, again, with a full phase out by 2030. Not lost on any of us. 2 plans, both with a full phase out by 2030. The planned legislation would leave Ohio mostly dependent on sales and use tax, which has been the largest tax source for the past several years, as lawmakers have cut income taxes and raised the CAT exemptions. This will surely put pressure on discussions of expanding the sales tax base to professional services. CPAs, it is time to pay attention and to tune in. Make your voices heard. At the time of its passage this past June, the current biennial budget was built on forecasts of about $28 billion in sales tax revenue over the biennium, compared to about $22.6 billion in income taxes and about $4.3 billion in CAT revenue. Simply stated, it is time to get in the game. The Ohio Society is tuned in, building relationships, and making our position known. Now is the time for you to let us know what you think. Do you support eliminating Ohio state income tax on non-business income, even if it could mean paying a higher sales tax rate, including on most professional services, such as potentially those provided by CPAs, attorneys, consultants, realtors, etc. The poll is open. I'm going to give this 45 seconds. It's interesting. The day I walked in the door over 11 years ago, sales tax on services was told to me as this is the hill we die on. And Governor Kasich 3 more times tried to get us on that hill to die, but we were successful in not doing so. I'll observe over time as this tax environment changes, so too am I seeing an acumen change. So the poll is closed. 41% said what I expected CPAs would say. Not sure, we want to know the details. 35% said no, they would not support. 24% said yes. The time has shifted. The environment has shifted. I will tell you today, we're going to go to work to better understand the proposal in your perspective and engage you in this conversation. But I think it's clear to say things are moving and we need to move and get our arms around them. I shared the results so you can see how your peers respond. Moving on to federal activity. On January the 31st, the U.S. House passed bipartisan tax legislation by a wide margin that would temporarily expand individual tax credits and revive several business tax breaks. This roughly $80 billion package would be paid for by ending the fraud-plagued employee retention credit earlier than planned. The bill, House HR 7024, is titled the Tax Relief for American Families and Workers Act of 2024. It's important to reinforce this is not a done deal, not a done deal. It awaits an uncertain future in the U.S. Senate, with some senators calling for hearings and others requesting to make changes to the bill. As always, stay tuned in to OSCPA e-news and webcasts like this town hall for the latest information. With that, I know I've taken us over by a few minutes. I will hang out for those who would like to hang with me. I'm going to look here at the Q&A. Greg, feel free if you'd like to come back up. I'm not sure, but I'm wondering. Yes, Andrew, it is an hour program, and yes, I did run you over by 2 minutes. Thanks for keeping me on my toes. Greg, anything on the Supreme Court case? I'm trying to be mindful. I haven't read all these.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just address. I mean, this wasn't the, we filed an amicus brief in this case. It was not the legal arguments we would have made, but we tried to get the court to decide it. But the issues between withholding and refunds was not in front of them. The attorneys representing Shad were actually just trying to get the provision overturned as unconstitutional. We didn't think it was unconstitutional. We were part of the groups that advocated for that because we wanted to have the withholding to be continued at the business location. So, this refund issue, if I'm getting questions, there are still cases out there around the state. I don't know if the Ohio Supreme Court is going to take up another one of these or not. The statute of limitations for 2020 refunds does run this year. And so if members want to file protective refund claims, I'm not going to tell you not to do that. There's still 3 months, because Rita said that you have until May 17th. I would check with individual cities on that. Some may say April 15th, but if you want to file those protective refund claims, file them. But the court pretty clearly yesterday said, that the legislature was constitutional. We agree, but it was not in our view, it was not a taxability provision. It was a withholding provision. And so that's where the disagreement is at on this. And so as of now, you're not going to have cities issuing refunds because they're relying on the Shad case from yesterday.
Thanks, Greg. Last question I'll answer before I bring this in for a landing. Tom Pack, sorry, I'm just now answering one you asked early on. Tom asked about the Zoom AI companion that some of you have seen added to your Zoom account. It does require, in most instances, I'll call it administrator permission for employees to use. What does it do for Zoom? It is something we're using. It's something we're testing and found good success with it. For those who are interested, you can Google or however you choose to search Zoom AI Companion, but it does help capture notes from Zoom calls, Zoom meetings you might be in. So if you're there and you're like me and you can't take serious enough notes or keep focused on it, it does allow for some help with that. It has some other features, but it is something that we are checking out and trying. It's a right fit for us from a test case. Whether it is or isn't for you, I will leave for you all to decide. With that, I appreciate you giving me an extra 5 minutes. For those of you who hung out, thank you, thank you. I hope you have a great rest of the February. And for those of you who are in that time of year that is the most wonderful for you, and yes, that was heavy sarcasm, hang in there. Let us know how we can help. Thanks for all you do to help drive this business environment forward. In our state, there is one truth that is eternally known. As businesses find their way forward in an increasingly agile and nimble environment where change is the norm, there is one place they know that they can find the answers they need, and that is from their trusted advisor, and that is Ohio CPAs. Thanks for what you do, how you do it, the way you do it. Keep your head up, let us know how we can help, and have a great rest of your week. Take care, everybody.